code or not to code? That's the question that early stage startup founders ask themselves. There is a perception that technical founders have an advantage over non-technical founders. But is it true? In this show, my brilliant guest, Sophia Matveeva, and I will shine the light on this debate and, of course, give you lots of tips to grow your startup. Sophia is the CEO and founder of Tech For Non-Techies, an education company and consultancy. Sophia has contributed to the Financial Times, the Guardian and Forbes, and on entrepreneurship and technology, and was also a non-tech startup founder. But this is only just the beginning. We will find out a lot more about Sophia in a bit. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups live show. I'm Nalima Kango from Athena Leaders. As a tech consultant and startup advisor, I will answer live the burning question that you have on your way to Series A+. Subscribe and tune in every week to meet amazing guests, startup founders, investors, and more. More importantly, relax and enjoy the show. Sophia, it's been a really long time since I've been wanting to have this discussion ever since I discovered what you've done, especially when it comes to you also being a non-tech startup founder and going on to do some even more amazing thing that we will find out today. Can you please let us share with our audience a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Nelly. So first of all, thank you so much for having me on your show. I love the insight, but also the energy that you bring because, the startup world is stressful. So whenever somebody comes to it with a smile and a good attitude, I think it's a good change.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I am Sophia and I run a company called Tech For Non-Techies. And I also have the Tech For Non-Techies podcast where you can learn a lot of stuff for free. And the reason why I run a company called Tech For Non-Techies is because I didn't start my career in technology and frankly didn't ever think of it as a career path. So if this sounds like you, then carry on listening. So I studied political science as my first degree, and then I worked in the media, and then in finance, I worked in private equity in London. And then I decided to go and get my MBA at Chicago Booth. For those of you who don't know much about business schools, it's consistently ranked as the global #1 by The Economist and Business Week and various other places. Anyway, it's where Barack Obama was teaching before he went into politics. So it's good. The reason I'm telling you this is, of course, I want to impress you. But also, I thought, if you go to a really, really good business school, you're going to come out with all the skills that you need to have a successful career in the business world, right? Like, that's why you go to get an MBA. And also, my MBA cost me $180,000. So you'd think, for $180,000, you're going to get some good stuff. I did get lots of good stuff. But when I was doing my MBA, I decided to start a technology startup. And we'll talk about, more about that startup in a minute, but it was really then that I saw that I was learning a lot of business skills. I was learning a lot about finance, about business strategy, about accounting. But I graduated with an MBA not knowing what an API is. And this is where I think a lot of smart business professionals find themselves, that you kind of feel like, okay, you're doing quite well in your career. Maybe, I don't know, you're a lawyer, or maybe you work in marketing or in strategy at a large corporate or in finance or whatever. You're pretty good at what you do. You're probably paid relatively well. And then this whole tech revolution just comes and slaps you in the face. And then you think, well, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to learn to code? Am I supposed to learn to become a data scientist? What are all of these words that people are using? Like, what's an API? What's a backend? And it's really those people that I'm trying to help in Tech For Non-Techies. So Tech For Non-Techies came out of me personally thinking, I don't want to be a coder. I don't want to be a developer, but I want to work with developers. I want to lead a tech company. So what on earth do I need to know about tech in order to lead in the digital age? That's how Tech For Non-Techies was born.
I love what you mentioned earlier about digital literacy, because this is the new thing, a new era is coming up. I think especially in the UK over the last few years, the curriculum at school has been changed to bring a lot more modules there to help people create apps at a very young age as we are going into the world out there. And of course, even now there's so many tools out there that people can use, no code tools that can really help someone at the very beginning and start creating an app. But I also love the concept of digital literacy. So can you tell me a little bit about how, how do you use that concept in the Tech for Non-Techies?
Mhm. So what I always say is that not everybody needs to learn to code to succeed in the digital age, but everybody needs to learn how to work with people who code. Developers, data scientists, data analysts, they have a different language and different working styles. And so, for example, if you don't know the core language of what these people, if you don't know the core words of what these people are doing, if you don't know how to speak to them, you're not going to be a very good collaborator. And the reason why I say that everybody has to know this stuff is because think about it. Like, we are now in an age where even your coffee shop has an app. So technology used to be a sector that is very separate, whereas now there are a lot of companies that are traditional businesses that actually, if you look at their structure and where they're getting their revenue from, they look kind of at least like a tech company or like a tech company hybrid. For example, I recently saw that Starbucks, the coffee chain, they get 54% of their in-store revenue from their app. So basically, more than half of the money that they make in their coffee shops actually comes through their app.
That's quite insightful. I didn't know that. I mean, that's huge, a big change from their previous operating model.
Exactly. And also, what does that actually show about the people who are working in Starbucks? Because Starbucks, it's still a coffee chain. So their main capabilities are sourcing coffee from farmers, managing coffee shops, and selling food, which I think they really need to work on. I think their snacks are terrible, but that's another point. So there's still a coffee shop that sells cake. But given that their app is so important, what did their team, what did their managers have to learn? So for example, the reason why their app is so successful in driving revenue is because they have a really, really good personalization algorithm. So basically, the more you use their app, the more the app understands what kind of coffee do you like. So maybe on Monday, you're going there for a particular coffee and a healthy snack. But then, by about Thursday or Friday, you're kind of giving up and you're starting to load up on the sugar. I mean, I know we all do that.
Oh, that's definitely what I do every week.
Yeah, and then like maybe on Sunday you're a bit hungover and you're going for that like hungover breakfast with a massive coffee. Then the app learns that this is your normal behavior, and so it's going to suggest things that are more relevant to you on a particular day. And if you're not going for it, it's going to send you discounts and so on. So that means that the management of a coffee company has had to learn about AI personalization. They've had to learn about how an app is made. They've had to learn about, processes like Agile and Scrum, which is not what you would think about from a coffee company. And this is why I say that, yes, if you're working in the startup world, you absolutely have to know this stuff. But I actually think this is not just for startups. This is if you want to have a business career, you need to understand who actually has to work on an app. Because most people think it's just developers. But no, there are developers, there are designers, there are different types of developers. There are all sorts of different roles. And you
in
need
fact,
to understand
just to jump on what you just mentioned there in terms of because obviously this show is for startup, but you've mentioned something that's quite interesting for other people who might not be in startups, that this is also getting very important for you to understand the basic of digital literacy. It does remind me of a friend of mine. She works at the University of Cambridge and she manages some of the colleges there. And it's actually interesting to see the changes as well in terms of automation is becoming something that people do a lot more. So by using non-coding tools and what's out there, they are now thinking about how to create processes themselves, but not just go beyond processes. It's kind of like creating an entire application inside the organization, which normally would not have happened. Normally, it's kind of like the IT department that would be responsible for that. Whereas right now, it's really going and it's becoming accessible for so many people.
And also what I think is interesting at this point is that startups have usually, B2B startups have to sell to a corporate, which means that people in the corporate have to understand what the startup does. And I've often met, especially technical founders, but also non-technical, but basically, founders who have built a product and the product is good. So literally the product does solve a problem. The pricing is decent, like everything works. But if they're selling to people in a corporate, there are some people in corporates that are really innovative. Maybe they have an innovation department and they actually see, okay, we can see how this technology fits in. We can see what it does. Let's run a pilot. That is a good corporate client because they're educated in how to speak tech. They're educated in digital. But then there are, unfortunately, still quite a lot of corporate clients who still, they're still quite slow moving. And this is actually, I think, one of the issues that startups face, because it's not just about, building a really great product. You then have to convince people to give you money for it, right? Because it's about building a business. And if you are selling to people who don't understand what your product does and don't see how it's going to fit into what they're doing, doesn't matter how fantastic your product is, your market is going to be limited. This is why I've actually found that I've seen a lot of startup founders who end up becoming educators, not because they want to, but because they literally have to go into a corporate, literally teach a bunch of workshops about digital and about technologies, and then say, okay, this is the suite of products that you need. Okay, we are one of those products, but there's you have a bunch of other issues that you need to solve. And so this is why I really think that this education thing of digital literacy, it's important to startups, but it's also important to basically anybody who wants to have a good career in today's age.
Yeah, definitely. And on the topic of the tech founders, I think again this is a question for anybody listening to this, regardless of what moment of the day you are live or replay. One question and one debate I'm starting now on social media is the fact that I believe, again, my personal opinion, I believe that non-tech founders, in a way, have it a little bit easier than tech founders. Now, the reason why I say that it's starting a debate is I see that as a bit controversial, as the more you go online, there's a lot of things about how hard it is for non-tech founders to build a tech app for an app, which is technology. Yet I believe that when you start looking at, we move away from just the app and you look at the company, right? The startup, and getting investment, going to client and do exactly what Sophia said in terms of selling the product and the education. I found that non-tech tech founders have it a little bit harder, and non-tech founders could have an advantage that tech founders don't have. What do you think, Sophia?
Nelly, it's so funny that you say this because I think it just highlights this human condition that we always think the grass is green on the other side. It's like whatever we think we are, we look at these, these other people, whoever the other people are in the context, and we think, well, they have it easier, whereas I am struggling.
Exactly.
Because literally non-technical founders are always going on about how, well, I have to learn all of this stuff. I also then have to find the money to pay developers, or I have to learn how to use Bubble. It's so hard, whereas I wish I could code it myself. So I think that, there's no proof, because we all basically want the impossible, which is we want somebody who is capable of creating great design, great code, also being a great salesperson. And that person just doesn't exist. It's also, it reminds me of a podcast episode I had with a technical founder. So most of the people that I interview on the Tech For Non-Techies podcast are non-technical founders and non-technical professionals succeeding in tech, because I really want to show people what you have to learn, and I want to inspire people. But sometimes I have a techie on who can speak to non-techies. And I had this technical founder on. Her name is Jenny Griffis. You can follow her on Twitter. She's really, really inspiring. She's the founder of a company called Snap Fashion. So it's literally image recognition for the fashion industry. And she's got like an MBE, etc., etc. And she was saying that, you know, she studied engineering at university. She has been awarded lots of literally national awards for engineering. She's a very deep technical founder. And she said that when she started her company, she basically ended up going to London Business School to take a basic course on business, because she was saying, oh my God, I know a lot about computer science. I've designed this very innovative technology, which nobody else has, but I don't know anything about business. And I was terrified. And I was listening to this and I was thinking, this is literally hilarious, because I've taught at London Business School and I've taught Tech for Non-Technical Founders as an extra course at London Business School. And there were all these MBA people, all these people like me with business backgrounds who were like, oh my God, I know lots about business. I know everything about business. I don't know anything about technology. Am I ever going to succeed? And it's literally, it's the same conversation, but you can just change some of the words. So I don't think anybody has it easier. I think it just shows that all of us have to learn and find great partners. Like the best partnerships are essentially people like you, Nelly, and people like me. People with technical backgrounds,
There we go.
and people with commercial backgrounds. Exactly.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I guess some of the mistakes I see a lot with the tech founder and some of my tech founders background clients is sometimes actually knowing tech could also be a disadvantage, right? First, from what you said, Sophia, the business side of things and the business development is already a challenge. The marketing, depending on how technical you were, I can put my hands up. When I first started my company, the first thing I knew I was going to do is to get someone to do my marketing, because there's no way I'm going to faff around with that, which is still very important to run a business. And of course, and business development as well. The way you have to think differently, the mindsets, the challenges you go through, and the sales is something that's very not attractive to someone who enjoy coding, right? So those were changes, and that I had to go through, and a lot of it also affects your personality, which I believe is even harder to change when your personality needs to change to become more of a public person to run your business. But one of the things that I love to highlight to technical founders, which I think goes even beyond the business side, is that they tend to really believe in their technical skills, and they take the pleasure into coding that sometimes go a bit too far. So for example, and I know, when you build a product, you want to make sure that you do the basic minimum, like an MVP or something that you can take out, create a concept first, and you go out and sell the concept. Now, for someone who's used to knowing that they can actually build this thing, this full thing themselves, and they take pleasure into that, it's easy to digress from the business and the not sexy way of running your business and to spend more time on that. So I always love to highlight to technical founder the importance of really the basics of product management, the basics of those concepts, which they already know, because some of them do know about it. But it's kind of like when you're in the nitty-gritty of details and your head is full of stuff, do you stand up and look up and actually see and put yourself in the situations of changing how you will normally build an app to avoid building the full thing, but try to validate as you're going along?
I think what you're also pointing out here is that everybody, technical or non-technical, most people are terrified of sales, because I think sales has such a bad rap. Because we think, like a lot of people think selling something is kind of being like this used car salesman and being like, come on, I've got this dodgy banger, like whatever. But actually, we have to reframe our idea of what selling is, because there are lots of services that I'm very, very happy to pay for. Like, I think that it's a good service. So for example, I have a business coach, and she genuinely has really helped me kind of think about my business strategically and kind of work on my business rather than in my business. And yeah, I think you should get paid for it. And so whenever, I sometimes still get to see her marketing on Facebook, and I'm like, that's great. Like, I understand that in order for her to deliver a great service and to also run advertising campaigns and to tell people about her services, she needs to get paid. And I'm happy to do that. I'm not gonna try to steal somebody's time. And I think because sales has this bad rap, people then don't want to do it, whether they're technical or non-technical. And the other side is that also when you are going out and you're telling people about your services and telling people about your product, you naturally get rejected, because this is what happens. Lots of people, maybe they don't need your service, maybe they don't need it right now, maybe they do need it, but they've already bought something else, and basically their budget is taken up for that quarter. And it's so hard to not take it personally, even though we know we shouldn't take it personally, but it's so hard. It is hard to basically get 10 rejections and then go and be just as enthusiastic to go after the 11th. And yet this is what you have to do to build a business. And so I do think that working on the technical side, or also just getting yourself lost on kind of more the technical aspects of the business, not necessarily writing code, but maybe playing around with your social media, all of this stuff is, I think, emotionally easier than basically going and standing up and saying, hey, this is my business, this is the problem that I'm solving, would you like to try my product, or would you like to invest in my business? And then stand basically in front of people and be rejected. I think doing the technical stuff is emotionally less hard than people telling you that hey, your idea is terrible and I'm never going to use it, I'm never going to use your stuff.
Yeah, and this is there's one company I quite like, and I'm probably going to trying to get them on the podcast as well, Salesforce startups. I think I love their model, as they really help startup founders, especially whether you come from an industry where sales and business development wasn't really your background, whether you're technical, for sure that's not going to be your background. Then it's kind of how do you they give you kind of a package and the processes so that that sales, in addition to the skills, the resilience, the mindsets, getting out of your comfort zone, but there's also an actual process that goes through, and it does take a lot of time for someone who doesn't have that background to put it together. And I've read tons of books when I started my company. I had a lot of mentors, coach, and all of that. But I also love the idea that there are companies out there that can also help technical or non-technical founders on their journey to create a strong sales department and just to grow their startup.
I think, this really reminds me of the essay by Paul Graham, Do Things That Don't Scale. And in it, he talks about the early stages of Airbnb, because, we all know and love Airbnb now, but in the early days, it was like a crazy idea that essentially they were saying, hey, somebody is going to come to your house and stay on your sofa, and yeah, we guarantee that they're not going to kill you in the night. That's quite a big, scary proposition. And so they literally went door to door. They went to people's houses to try to convince the host to understand what their fears were, but also to take photos of the host homes and so on. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that a lot of founders, whether technical or not, the moment they have a product, they want to do basically digital advertising. They want to either fund a Facebook campaign or a LinkedIn campaign to get customers on board. And I say, hey, you know what? Wait, do that. But in order to advertise, you need to understand who you're advertising to. So who wants to use your product, and also why? Because the reason why you think your product is great might be different to what your user thinks. And the only way you find that out is basically hand-to-hand combat. You've got to go out and you've got to speak to people.
Yeah.
And that is literally you using your mouth to speak to another human being. It is as non-technical as it gets.
Yes.
But that's what you have to do in order to grow your product, whether your product is an app and the aim is to have lots of users like Airbnb, or maybe it's some kind of SaaS product, whatever it is, you have to do things that don't scale at the beginning. And Most people are terrified of that. Most people would much rather hide behind an analytics platform and just be
Yeah.
like, I'm just going to put, $100 behind this campaign and hope it's going to be fine.
Magically, the clients become flogging. And in fact, I'm going to add even one more thing to the great advice that you just shared in terms of, go out there and talk to people as early as possible. The other thing to also, well, one of the reasons why it's really important is to also change your mindset on not just solving that particular problem that your platform does, but what is the bigger problem that the company is trying to solve? Because I found a lot of startup founders really fall in love with the little bits and the little gap that they're bringing in the organization. Yet, if you really get to understand the organization pain, you might not be able to solve absolutely everything, but it will allows you to either grow your platform or even have a consultancy that you can tag along so that you can walk the clients to the journey. Because I found that sometimes you might get a no on a sales call of someone who I was actually speaking to someone about a startup founder about that. Someone came to you, they saw you online, you didn't even interact with them. They are begging and want to see what you are doing. But if they get lost in, okay, I see what you're doing, but I just can't see how I'm going to put it in my business. Well, you're the expert. Walk them to your platform, where you are today, how do you get there, and what you get on the other side.
This actually really reminds me of a client that I'm working with right now. And I think she's a really good example of a non-technical founder really succeeding. So her name is Marilyn Sandor, and she is a pediatric dentist. So she is a dentist for kids. And during the pandemic, obviously, people couldn't physically go to dentists. And there are some issues that you really need to go to a dentist for, but then there are others that essentially you could do through telemedicine. So what she did is she thought, okay, well, I'm going to invent an app for my clients. So basically, parents are going to use this app and I'll interact with them through this app. And then I'll be able to send them a bunch of tests. They'll send me some photos. And then I'll be able to tell, like, is this just, a milk tooth coming out? Or is this really a serious problem that we need to, I don't know, do COVID tests for and then come in to her dental practice for? And so she was using this product. And you can actually, it's out on the US App Store. So if you're in America, you can check out GoodCheckup. That's what it's called. But what ended up happening is that, it's not only little children and their parents that have this issue. There are lots of people who essentially would also quite like telemedicine with their dentist, who would rather just take a bunch of photos and use an app to be told, it's fine, take these medicines, you'll be okay in 3 days, especially if you live in a rural area. But because her actual app has to interact with children, it's got cartoons, it's very kid friendly. And so what she is doing is that she's speaking to all sorts of organizations. We had a little bit of a break. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. You said that she's speaking to a lot of organizations, and that's why it got cut off.
So there are organizations who are reaching out to her who are saying, okay, our market, our users are not 5 years old. Our users are maybe 25, 55, or, maybe they are in an old people's home and in a care home. And so maybe because, the issues are still the same. The issue of I can't or I don't want to go all the way to a dentist, they're the same. It's just you need to repackage an app for children in a different way to people who are living in a care home. And so what she's finding is that essentially by speaking to lots of different organizations, she can take the core technology and then actually scale it to all sorts of different companies for kind of the same use, but to more and more users. So what this shows is that whatever, whether you're technical or non-technical, when you have a product and it solves a particular problem, think about, okay, who else experiences that problem? Are there other markets? Are there adjacencies? And you know what? Take that meeting, because sometimes it's going to be too hard. Sometimes it's going to kind of it's going to be too hard to, I don't know, reskin it or to make a white label product. Sometimes you don't want to do that. But other times, you could literally take your product, change the design, which will just only cost you a few $1,000s, and whoosh, you can enter into a whole new market and maybe have a really good business partnership.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And in fact, my favorite analogy to kind of talk about this is, well, building a product is a bit like raising a child. You might invest a lot of money from the age that they're 3. You give them a tennis racket, but there is no certainty that they will become the next Serena Williams, for example. Along the way, they will grow and adapt and become whoever they want to be. Of course, with a product, yes, you do have the parameters of how you build a product. But as you said, Sophia, reacting to the market and the market need is such an important skill for startup founders, not to be too attached to, this is what I only wanted this. But if the market is strongly telling you and they want to buy, well, why not adapt to that?
Well, this is actually also the story of Tech For Non-Techies. So my first company is a retail tech company. And as I mentioned, I didn't know anything about technology. But because I went to one of the world's top business schools and I got a good team together, we went through some top accelerators, basically managed to raise some money. And then I actually had a tech team working with me, and I was literally like, I do not understand what Ruby on Rails is. I don't know what they're talking about. And I thought, okay, a good way to learn is obviously, I'm already working with these people. I did take also a bunch of courses, but the courses were kind of not necessarily that helpful. What was more helpful is what I learned on the job. But also, I started writing for Forbes about my startup journey, and I started interviewing other non-technical founders about what they had to learn about tech. And essentially, I used it as free consulting because, if you say, hey, can I interview you for Forbes? Lots of people say yes. And this is really when I started learning that as a non-technical person working with the tech team, you need to understand concepts, but you don't necessarily need skills. So what that means is that you need to understand like what is an API, but you don't actually need to build it. And so I was writing these articles about basically for non-technical founders because that's who I was. And then I created a course called Tech for Non-Tech, Introduction to Tech for Non-Technical Founders. And again, I didn't have any intention of having that as a business. It was just people who were asking me, as you said, driven by market demand. And then that's kind of where it went. But then I started seeing that there were people who had no intention of becoming founders who were taking the Tech for Non-Technical Founders course. And I was thinking, like, why are you doing this? And then I saw that there were people who were investors. There were people who wanted to work in a tech company and they knew that they weren't going to become a coder, but they needed to learn, they needed to get an introduction. So I started creating other products like Tech for Investors or How to Speak Tech for Leaders, which is a corporate leaders course. And from that, it grew and grew. And the reason why I kind of give this example is that I think it's much easier for everybody to kind of understand, because now when I talk about what I do, actually the market is huge, right? It's non-technical professionals who want to succeed in the digital age. The market is huge. But if I had gone for that just straight away, like from point one, I wouldn't have got anywhere, because if you're trying to talk to everybody, you're not talking to anybody. And so I was speaking to a really specific niche, and that niche was the niche that I knew, non-technical founders, because I was like, I am you. I know what you're worried about. I know that you're probably trying to force yourself to learn Python late at night, and I know it's probably not going very well. So let me show you what you can do instead. But it's only by putting yourself out there that actually can you get market feedback. Because like I've told you a very positive story, but also there were lots of negative stories. There were lots of things I tried, both in Tech For Non-Techies and in my previous business, that essentially, you try it, you make it, you put it out there, and like you get crickets, like nothing. Or like, I remember.
Is there anything that you wouldn't mind sharing with our audience here?
Yeah. So I can give you an example. In my first company, NT, it's a retail tech company, which we had to shut down during the pandemic. But essentially, what you could do is you could take a photo of yourself and get feedback from professional stylists. So you could ask a question like, "Shall I wear this on a date, or is this bag really worth $500?" And professional stylists would write feedback to you. And we then had users writing, and users even trying to put up photos on our social media and tag us in saying, "I wore it, like I followed your advice. This is how it looks. Like I had a really great night. Like, or, I felt fantastic on my date, had lots of fun. Thank you." And we were like, "Oh, isn't that nice? Like people are already sending us these photos. Why don't we design a feature which basically takes people, like where people first they post a question like, "Shall I wear this on a date?" Then they get some feedback from stylists, and if they want to then share the final look, they can do so because they're already doing it. And so we designed this feature where you could share the final result, and nobody used it. Like literally nobody used it. And what is the lesson here? Because people were actually, literally, people were already emailing us photos and people were sharing them on social media. So it was very reasonable to expect that if we designed this feature, people would use it.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't. And what I want people to see from this is that sometimes you follow the right process, and still actually it doesn't mean that like
Yeah.
that is guaranteed. And yeah, it was annoying because we had to take some time to build this feature, but at the end of the day, it's one feature.
Yeah.
So yes, it was annoying, but another lesson from this is that we kept on monitoring, are people using it? Then we saw that people were not using it, even though we'd send notifications. We literally emailed people saying, "Thank you very much for emailing us your photo. Why don't you upload it to the results one?" And nothing. And we saw that actually it was costing us money to, in terms of storage cost, to keep the feature. And so we killed it. And you actually see a lot of tech companies creating something new, seeing whether people are using it, and then if it's not working, or if it's not working on that platform, throwing it out. Like, remember, Twitter also had stories, like you could post
Oh,
maybe
yeah.
disappearing. And yeah, we
Even
do that on
LinkedIn tried it at some point, and it didn't land really nicely, and they
yeah,
backtracked from that.
exactly, but it's working on Instagram. So
Yeah.
I think this is kind of what digital innovation, tech innovation is. Like you see what users are doing, see how they're behaving, try a particular idea, but it's still like there are no guarantees. The only way you know whether it's going to work is after you've released it, you've given it a good go. If it's not working, kill it, move on to the next thing.
Oh, thank you. And actually, we've got a couple of messages in the chat. One says hello, and there's one about very inspiring for non-tech founders, professionals. Great takeaway so far. The grass is not always greener on the other side. You can't cater to everyone. So if one listening to this and wondering what's that about, then go back and watch the beginning of the show. But thanks for sharing your thoughts. It was lovely having you on the having this conversation with you, Sophia. There's quite a lot of interesting insight, and I'm sure that a lot of people, regardless of whether they are technical or non-technical founders, will have a lot that they can take away from this session, if nothing else, to help them in the mindset and how they can grow their startups. So before we go, do you have if I can ask you one parting advice that can help a startup founder that is starting really early stage and they are a little bit bewildered?
Mm-hmm. So I would say that smart people can do anything. Smart people can learn to do hard things. And the thing that really helps me is inspiration. So find people who you believe to be like you and see how they did it. Because yes, it's interesting to learn about Steve Jobs, but I don't really identify with Steve Jobs. Like we don't have a lot in common. And so it's interesting, but it's not that relevant. And so for me personally, it was really, really interesting to find the success stories of non-technical founders. And so if you're a non-technical founder, listen to the Tech For Non-Techies podcast, because I interview lots of non-technical founders. And also, literally just Google like non-technical founders, like find out how they did it, because that's going to educate you, but also it's going to inspire you. Or if, for example, you're a technical founder, but you've never sold anything in your life and you're terrified and you're thinking, oh my God, I can write the code, but I've never sold anything, then literally just know that there are technical founders who've learned how to sell and they've become great storytellers. That is possible. Find those people. Like, don't look for somebody who is a poetry grad and now worked at Netflix and is now a great storyteller. Like, you won't be able to identify with that. Look for the person who studied computer science and is now a fantastic guest on podcast. What did they have to learn about speaking, about storytelling, in order to have that evolution?
Brilliant. Oh, that's such a great advice. And thanks for sharing, Sophia. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, do find your tribe when it comes to, especially for the early beginning of your journey. And do check out Sophia Matveeva. You're very active. She's very active on Twitter, on LinkedIn, all of the platforms out there, and the Tech For Non-Techies podcast, which has a lot of goodies, and the website as well. So I will highly recommend that you do give her, check her out and find out, again, discover the community. And I hope it will also inspire you to stay within the startup world, which I absolutely adore. But for anyone listening right now, if you know any other amazing people that can come as a guest on our podcast, and if you think that there are other startup founders out there that would love to be inspired, do share this episode or anything that we have on our podcast. We are here to build our community together. Remember, dream, build, play. Let's design a happy and productive workplace playground.